I'm with the Northwest Forest Worker Center. Our mission is to promote a forestry sector that treats all workers and harvesters of non-timber forest products and the land with respect. And when I say forest workers, the people that I'm talking about are workers in what's called the forestry services industry, which is not logging. It is the tree planters, the thinners, the people who do the thinning in the forest to protect homes and businesses from catastrophic wildfires. They create and improve wildlife habitat. They control erosion in riparian areas, and they do all the tasks that are necessary to care for and tend America's forest lands. Today, and for the past few decades actually, most of these forest workers are immigrants from Latin America. Here in the Rogue Valley, most of them are Spanish speaking, so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. There are 4 major issues that forest workers face. Those are wage theft, safety and health, working conditions, and retaliation. And these are all environmental justice issues. These are environmental justice issues because treatment of workers and treatment of the land goes hand in hand. If you see workers and natural resources merely as inputs to industrial processes, you will end up abusing both. These are also environmental justice issues because workers of color, in this case Spanish-speaking immigrants from Latin America, are disproportionately exposed to environmental risks in the workplace. And those risks are the possibilities of getting injured or ill from environmental hazards in the workplace. Now, this has a long history in America, going way, way back, and an example from this region is the logging industry, the lumbering industry in Weed, California in the early decades of the 20th century. At that time, African American workers that were working as loggers in Weed were given the most dangerous task in the woods, which was choker setter on the skidder. And that skidder they called the Titanic. The Titanic was the state of the art at that time, but it was extremely dangerous. In fact, it was so dangerous that the white workers called it the N-word killer. Now, coming back to the present day in this same region, Northern California, Southern Oregon, there's a similar division of labor in which Spanish-speaking Latino immigrants are kind of channeled into the labor-intensive types of jobs in the forestry services industry, while white workers tend to get the more technical jobs that pay better. And this is actually documented in peer-reviewed studies in the social scientific literature. It's not just based on casual observation. So now I'll talk a little bit about the 4 classes of issues that forest workers face that I mentioned earlier, starting with wage theft. 4 years ago, the Northwest Forest Workers Center did a survey of 150 forest workers here in the Rogue Valley in Jackson and Josephine counties. And what we found with regard to wage theft was that nearly half of the workers who responded to our survey said that they were not paid their full wages in 1 or more pay periods in the previous 12 months. And nearly half also were not paid overtime. So I'm not going to go through all our results. We had a very lengthy survey, but I'm just going to give you some highlights. Moving on to working conditions, more than 3/4 of the workers in our sample said that they were not given rest breaks at work. The 10-minute rest breaks that are required by law that workers are supposed to get during every 4 hours of work. The same proportion, 3/4, said that they did not consistently get a 30-minute lunch break daily. And speaking of clean drinking water, more than half did not get drinking water at the job site. And so what about 55% of them said they did was that they brought their own water or they drank out of streams. So they're drinking untreated water directly from mountain streams. Moving on to safety and health, 39% of the workers who responded to our survey said that they actually got some kind of safety training on the job. That's less than half. Only 39% are actually getting training. We didn't actually ask what the training consisted of, but what we know from our interactions with workers over the years is that usually the training means they partner up a new worker with an older worker who's been there for a while, and he kind of shows them what to do and maybe spends one morning with them. So it's not systematic, effective safety training that they're getting at all. We asked about injuries, and 27% of the workers said that they had a work-related injury in the previous 12 months that required that they miss 1 day or more of work. And what this suggests is that the official estimates are actually pretty low. And the official estimates, by the way, show that workers in the forestry services industry have very high injury and illness rates on the job and very high fatality rates. But our research suggests that those estimates are too low. I do want to add that we did not do a random sample because there is no sampling frame. There's no list of forest workers that you can go to, like a phone book or something, and actually select names randomly. So it's not a random sample, so we can't generalize to all forest workers, but it is the results do suggest that those official estimates are probably too low. And an interesting thing about our survey was that we did not ask who bought the workers their safety equipment, their hard hats and their chaps for protecting their legs from chainsaws, gloves and ear protection and all those sorts of things that they need. But a number of the workers just decided to write on the survey form themselves, you know what, I pay for these things myself. And it was about between 20 and 25% who were saying they had to buy their own hard hats, their own gloves, and those sorts of things. And again, that's required by Oregon state law that workers provide, that employers provide workers with the safety equipment that they need specific to their job tasks, free of charge. The exception in forestry work is boots. The workers are responsible under law for buying their own boots. Now, I do want to touch on pesticides. Ramon mentioned that there's never been a national study on the health of farm workers with regard to pesticides and other work-related issues. There's actually even less research on forest workers, and especially on forest workers with regards to pesticides. About half of the workers that responded to our survey said that they had mixed and or applied or worked with pesticides in some way in the previous 5 years. And about half of those, about 14% of our sample actually said that they had gotten sick from using pesticides. What they use mostly in forestry are herbicides. And the problem is that the received wisdom, what the employers say and what the Forest Service say, land management agencies say is, well, herbicides are not toxic to humans, which actually is not true. There is research that links pesticides, long-term exposure to herbicides to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, for example, and other health issues. So it is a concern. We need to have some studies done on forest workers and the effects of herbicide use on them, and that attitude that, well, if they're applying herbicides which are not toxic to humans, so we don't have to worry about it, needs to change. They need safety training. They need to have the safety equipment for proper use. I'm sure like we heard from Carmen, that you know, a lot of the forest workers that we know can't read. So even if they're given the data, the chemical data safety sheet, they're not going to be able to understand it. And so we need good training for forest workers. And forest workers do also apply insecticides and rodenticides at times because of, you know, battling pine beetle outbreaks, for example. So moving on to the fourth major category of issues that forest workers face is retaliation. Now, depending on the severity of the injury, in our survey we asked forest workers if they, when they did get injured, did they actually report it to their supervisor? Because we hear all the time from workers, well, no, I didn't report my injury because I was afraid if I got injured on the job, I'd be fired. And so we did ask, and actually what we found was that a lot of them did report their injuries to their supervisors. And, you know, kind of digging into it a little more in more detail, it depends on the severity of the injury. So if somebody is really severely injured, they're not going to lie out in the forest and die. And they will report their injury to their supervisor. But then we asked for the workers who said they did not report their injuries, why not? And the main reason they gave was because they were afraid they'd be fired for getting injured on the job. So again, we had a really lengthy survey, so we didn't include questions about more, you know, getting more detail about, well, did what happened for the workers who did report their injuries, what happened, did you get fired, or, you know, were there any consequences? But we do know some workers who have been retaliated against, and really that's all it takes to instill that fear, is just a few examples, and then the rest of the workforce is intimidated and fears that threat. So they won't report their injuries, they won't you know, ask for better working conditions, they won't ask for their rest breaks, they won't ask for proper safety equipment, they won't ask for a safety training, and those sorts of things. Now, the question is how widespread. Like I said, we did not get a random sample, so we can't generalize, but one thing that we did do in our analysis of the survey results was we looked at the number of contractors. So our survey was focused on Jackson and Josephine counties, and in 2011, which was the year that we did the survey, there were actually 42 forestry services contractors officially registered with the state of Oregon, and that the list of contractors is available online. And we interviewed workers who worked for 21 of those contractors. So we had workers from half of the forestry services contractors in Jackson and Josephine counties. And so breaking it down and looking at it by which contractors the workers worked for, workers in 90% of the companies in our sample said that they did not get rest breaks. So we had half the contractors in these two counties, and there's workers from most of those contractors are saying they don't get rest breaks. So we've got a lot of contractors out there who may not be in compliance with labor laws. Same thing with not getting the safety equipment that they need. It was 86% of the workers, of the contractors, you know, workers for those contractors. Not getting water at the work site, that was 86% also. So from these results, it looks like there's a real problem out there, and it needs to be addressed. So what we're seeing in conclusion is really systematic, disproportionate exposure of workers of color to environmental risks and mistreatment in the workplace. And the root causes of this environmental justice is an economic system that puts profits ahead of people. And we need to change that mindset. And what I've been talking about today are the immediate problems that workers of color face. But they're problems stemming from this mindset that are global in scale, not just only because these kinds of things happen to workers everywhere, but because of global change. We're seeing with global climate change is a direct outcome of that same mindset. So really, I'd like to argue that environmental justice, we won't get environmental justice until there's more compassion for people in our economic system and more compassion for the land. One of the commissioners, John, sorry I don't remember your last name, said that the values of cultural competency and the values of working towards environmental justice need to be infused throughout the agencies, and I would argue they need to be infused throughout society. Because how can... Thank you. How can we as a society care for the land if we can't even take care of our people? Thank you.
Thank you.